All right, I'm going to start then. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Tavern Talk Week 3. Now, don't get confused. This is actually the second Tavern Talk, but it's on the third week of the Tavern Dweller circuit, so we're just going to go with that Tavern Talk Week 3. It's going to be, like I said last week, it's going to be our 1-hour weekly stream where we get some of our talented local Hearthstone players together and just kind of talk about the local meta and the meta overall. Talk about the decks the finalists played each week and good stuff like that, just a general array of things. We'll come up with new content each week to share with you guys and all that. And our hope is that you learn something that you didn't know about Hearthstone every single week, that whether it be about the meta, whether it be a new favorite deck of yours, or a new tech for your favorite deck. So today we have a new guest with us, Joey Elodin. Along with our last week's cast, myself, Sergeant Balanced, Manny Iota, and Orion Thrawn. And this week, our sort of format that we're going to go with this week is we're going to discuss the general metagame, just the overall ladder, ranked play, what's been going on with that in the past week, since TGT is still developing rapidly. So we're going to talk some about that. We're going to talk about the meta, what we think it might be in the near future, based on the decks that we see right now. We'll also talk about some of the deck archetypes that we think might have potential, and we'll talk about some that we think probably are just going to die and don't have potential. And then we'll also discuss the deck lists of this week's finalists, who were Elodin and IceFat. So speaking of which, Elodin, good job on taking first place. And how does it feel to come on top of our largest weekly yet?
It feels good, Brennan. It's been a real honor playing in these tournaments. I've versed a lot of good players, and I've learned a lot about the game.
Awesome. Glad you enjoy it. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into our first topic of the evening. So we've seen many of the old deck lists that are still prominent post-TGT release. Some of these lists have been upgraded with TGT, and some haven't been upgraded. So Manny, why don't you start off by telling us some of the decks that haven't changed much, but we still see a lot of on ladder and just in tournaments in general?
Yeah, so I think kind of like what ended up happening is obviously when like TGT came out, everyone just wants to experiment with the new cards and try to find new stuff. So there was like this period where these old super refined deck lists weren't getting used, and now we start to see them come back as people are kind of like done experimenting and just want to go back to like super try hard mode because it's the new season. So I think like the biggest one, and this one wasn't even like a surprise before or after TGT came out, is like Patron is still obviously incredibly powerful, and with relatively little change, or like no change at all actually. Like no one saw like a single card that looked like it was going to go into it, and no one thought that was a bad thing. I think other ones that we saw were things like Freeze Mage is again another deck that seems to like have remained incredibly strong, and again like didn't receive anything, didn't need anything, and we've been seeing it have pretty good results at our local tournament, and it's still seeing lots of competitive play. And then there are a few other decks like I think like basically the Warlock archetypes like Handlock and Zoo. Neither of them have got anything, and people are starting to kind of like play around with them, see if they might be able to survive in this new meta. And Oil Rogue is one that I think might be struggling a bit, but again, like the list hasn't changed at all, but some people think like again it could also like stay around in the meta. So I don't know, what do you guys think? Like which of these likes?
Well, I definitely think Patron Warrior is still strong in TGT. However, it has some of its better matchups, and Druid and Priest have gotten considerably worse. In that Dragon Priest plays a lot of, or like the main Priest archetype these days is Dragon Priest, which plays a lot of durable minions, which have a lot of health and can give a lot of tempo to the Priest early on, which can make life difficult for the Patron Warrior, because their only removals really are 2 executes, and we've seen some of them adapt into this by starting to include a Shield Slam, usually in place of a Gnomish Inventor. But this matchup is still favored for the Dragon Priest, I think, because they have a lot of big threats and efficient answers. So in this respect, it kind of replicates some of the aspects that make Handlock a difficult matchup. While they don't have quite as big early threats, it still makes it hard for the Patron Warrior to keep up and get their combo going. But if they do get their combo going, they have a pretty high chance to win, as long as there's not like a chill maw or something that just wrecks them. And then Druid also got worse with the introduction of Darnassus Aspirant, which provides because most patron lists only have one Fiery Wax these days. So Fiery Wax is their only real answer to this on-curve aspirant. And if they don't have it, then they're probably going to get overrun pretty quickly. So that's the deal with patron, I think.
No. What do you guys think of like Oil Rogue? Do you think like that'll kind of like stick around? Because I was never like too much of a rogue player, but I know there are always those like diehard rogue players that think it's like a class and a deck that if you're good enough with, you can always like make it work. But I don't know.
Right, I've been playing a lot with Rogue lately. I've actually not been playing Oil Rogue, but I think it might have a place in this meta because Paladin is quite rampant and arguably one of the best decks on ladder at the moment, both secret and to a lesser extent mid-range. And Oil Rogue has a lot of tools to deal with that. They have their Phantom Knives, which you usually keep in the mulligan to deal with muster. You have Backstabs and SIs, and Eviscerate to deal with things like Murloc Knight and Shredders. But Rogue didn't really get anything new, while Paladin got some new stuff, so that kind of makes that matchup more awkward. Like the Murloc Knight, because you have to remove that right away. And then there's the Secret variant, which Secrets can be kind of difficult for Rogue to deal with if they don't have their flurries or their efficient board clears to prevent the Secrets from snowballing. So while Paladin did get harder for Rogue, I think Oil Rogue, if you've been playing it a lot, you can probably make it work in this meta.
Yeah, and then on top of that, also the meta itself has been sort of getting closer and closer to late game decks like Control Warrior, and there's been a lot of stronger heals running around, so it makes aggro decks a lot harder to play, but it makes combo decks a lot stronger. So like Breeze Mage and Oil Rogue and Patron and all that stuff, they actually get a buff the more times that like heals and like easy to remove taunt minions come out, like later game cards.
So, based on that, do you think that we might see, because we know that aggro decks counter a lot of those fast decks, like, for example, Face Hunter counters Handlock because it can just OTK, like, over towards the end game, and a lot of decks can't stabilize in time against really fast decks like Ebola did in Face Hunter. Do you think because we're seeing these control decks come back that we might see the aggro decks come back to counter some of those control decks?
I think maybe like, let's see. It depends on the control decks that end up being viable. Because I know like I love playing Control Warrior a lot, and I am always happy to queue into like a Face Hunter.
Yeah.
Like guaranteed. So it really depends. And I know you brought up like Handlock, and that's actually something I want to like segue into a bit, because that's like a deck that I'm not sure will be able to like stick around. At the same time, it's one that has been around like for so long, and just like its raw like power level of like, the tempo plays it can make, like dropping an 8/8 on turn 4, or like Molten Shadow Flame like Healbot, that kind of stuff. I don't know. Do you think like that'll be a deck we'll see again?
I know Orion had some thoughts on Handlock.
Well, Handlock, while the list hasn't changed, it has the tendency to like do nothing for the first few turns in a lot of cases, and a lot of decks such as Druid and Paladin got some better early drops, so there's kind of more pressure right from the get-go, and the Handlock has to react to that. And if they just tap and then Drake or Giant, while they do get their tempo, they've kind of done nothing for those first few turns, and those first few turns give time for the Druid or Paladin or whatever it might be to do things that they might have not been doing before because of some of these new cards.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Huh.
Okay, so are we thinking then that Handlock might actually kind of start to fade away out of the meta? Is that a possibility?
Eventually, if it doesn't get anything new. I'm actually kind of surprised that Handlock isn't like strong right now, because like most deck lists that I've been seeing, I've been running like Silence or things like that handle the Giants if you can get a good combo off. So I'm not sure what's going on. I haven't really seen the deck played.
Yeah. Probably what Ryan said, with how they just don't have the early game that a lot of the other classes have received. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. At the same time, one thing I do want to point out is I think like a lot of Handlock players, well, again with the whole thing, like all of these old lists, they weren't kind of seen a lot just because people were playing new cards. Like you didn't see Patron around a lot the first week, even though like you knew that was so super strong. But I think like one thing that actually kind of benefits the Handlock is the fact that Shaman hasn't been doing like as strong as people predicted. And Shaman tends to have a pretty good matchup against it. So it might just be a case of like, I don't know. I think like I'll hedge a bit, kind of like with what Illoden is saying. I think it may not be like super top tier anymore, but I think there's ways to tweak the list to make it playable. But that would depend on, of course, like how the meta like continues.
Yeah, so it sounds a lot like it'll end up being sort of tech choices that will make or break the deck, depending on
Yeah.
how it develops.
I can see that. Yeah.
Well, like with how you're saying about how it seems to be slowing down a bit, if like the game slows down enough and like most of the other slow decks are good enough at countering like the aggro lists to stop them from like reemerging, I think Handlock could then like reemerge because it tends to have like good matchup against like other control decks and slow decks.
Definitely.
Cool. Also, Manny and I were talking the other day about how it seems like we're sort of hitting a turning point where people have tried out all the new stuff, or almost all of it, all of the obvious new stuff, and how we're starting to see more of the older decks on ladder. Like Face Hunter was gone almost for an entire week, and then about 5 days ago it started to just reemerge, and now everyone's back to Face Hunter, and we've seen Aggro Paladin pop back up too. Did you have any other thoughts, Manny, about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was just kind of like the general synopsis of this topic, which is just like as people are kind of done experimenting with all the like new stuff, or like you said, like the obvious new stuff that you could like mess around with. Um, they're going back to these lists that are just kind of like tried and true, that are just like super refined. They've been around for forever, and that are just still very, very powerful. Like as that newness wears off, and people want to go back to like grinding stars and getting wins, and because I remember like when the first week of TGT, there were like no patrons. Like I didn't see any patrons at all, and like now they're coming back because patrons still patron.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. All right, and Orion, you actually had that experience where you're a patron main, but you weren't able to, or you were able to, but you chose not to play patron for like the first week or two of TGT because you were just testing out everything.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So now we're gonna go ahead and switch topics from the old list, or the old lists that have stayed the same, to the old lists that have gotten better with TGT, that received some cool upgrades in a few different cards. And Joey's gonna lead us off with that topic.
All right, so starting off, we're going to go with one of everyone's favorite decks, the Control Warrior. Now, the new cards that they added, a few people have been playing around with some of them. For instance, Variant Rens, that is the new legendary that was released, and it's a 10-drop, and it draws the first top 3 cards off your deck and plays them onto the field with their creatures. Some people have been playing around with that. I don't think it's that good, in the sense that yeah, you could get lucky with it. It's basically another RNG card, but it gets rid of battle cries and things of that sort. So it takes off a lot of value off of a lot of your good cards. So I'm not sure about running that in decks, but I have been seeing Bash in a lot of Control Warriors, and that has actually been really good. It's a good early game removal in case you didn't draw your Fiery War Axe on turn 2. On turn 3, you got Bash to get rid of an early game minion that's been giving you trouble on your board. And then another card I've been seeing people run is a card called Justicar. And what it does is it upgrades your hero power. And it gives you 4 armor instead of 2 whenever you use your hero power. Now, most people have been replacing like a Sludge Vulture for that. And it doesn't get you instantaneous value, so against the fast deck, it actually hinders you. But in the long mid-game to late-game decks, it really heals you over time, and it makes a humongous difference. Another deck, Tempo Mage, it received a card that's sort of like Polymorph, except it changes your creature into a hover. So it has essentially 2 effects. It switches one. It can either be removal if you have like a Frostbolt or a way to deal with it. You get rid of a big creature that's getting in your range, or get rid of a taunt minion so you can run all your minions into their face. Or you could use it for extra reach. Run a minion in, change it into Hover, it has charge, and you just run more 4 damage in. Because we all know Mage needed reach. Paladin is an interesting one. It got a bunch of new cards that completely changed the way the deck is kind of played. A lot of new decks emerged from the cards that they were given. For instance, Mysterious Challenger is the biggest one that we're all talking about. What it does is it brings all your secrets out on the field when you play the creature. Now, I mean, that sounds pretty bad when you think about it. A bunch of one-drop secrets in your deck. How could that be good? Now, what it does is it actually thins out your deck, which in any card game, that's great because that makes it so you can draw into your power spikes a lot more faster because there's a lot less crap you have to draw throughout the rest of the game. And it's actually changed a lot about how Paladin is played. I've been seeing a lot of different variants of this Secret Paladin. For instance, some of them run Tyrion, or like Lothab, or Dr. Boom, and some of them just run the normal hit your face until you die decks.
Yeah, leper gnomes and the sergeants.
Exactly.
Always leper gnome.
And another deck that almost never seems to change is your average everyday combo druid.
Combo Druid actually got some pretty nice upgrades this set.
Exactly. They got the Living Roots. It's 2 damage spell, or it can summon 2 1-drops. The reason this is good is 2 bodies on the field means 4 damage from your combo. Either that or it's 2 damage reach in the late game if you need it. It can hit face because Druid needed that. And Darius Aspirin is another creature that was added to the list. It's a new 2-drop that essentially works like Wild Growth if you've seen it. It gives you 1 mana, but if it dies, you lose the mana. Now, this card's strong simply because it's such an early game drop. It's a ramp into your late game. And then on top of that, it's got an amazing body, 2/3, very hard to deal with in the early game. So it really helps get your bigger minions out faster, and that's why I think Druid will always be here. And let's see here. Hunter. Hunter is a deck that has changed slightly. They got a new creature that kind of helps out mid-range Hunter a little bit, but the deck is still like curve out and you win, curve, and if you don't curve out, you kind of lose. And then, so yeah, that's pretty much it. What do you guys think? Did I miss anything about the new cards that are added?
Yeah, I think those were the main things. Let's go down the line. You mentioned like Control Warrior first, getting like Varian Rin, and I tend to like agree with you. I'm not like everyone before was like so stoked for this card, thinking it was like the most powerful one out of the set, like by miles. And I played around with it, and it's just like a little bit too YOLO for me. The battle cries in Warriors, or just in control decks, tend to be like really important. Like you really want to time those out, so losing those tends to be pretty bad. And then just in general, like it doesn't help you against aggro decks. And against control decks, you don't really like want to dump out all your bombs and threats because other control decks tend to have like some sweeper AoEs. Like I don't know that there's a control list that exists without like a light bomb or quality contact or molten shadow flame, brawl, like all that kind of stuff. I don't think the card's like bad enough that it won't see play, but I think now you basically kind of have like these two like warrior archetypes where there's like classic control warrior and there's a Varian Ren control warrior that is still seeing like competitive play. It's just you really have to like change the list around to make it work. I don't know, Thrawn, what do you think about like Varian Ren? Because I know that's been like a very hot topic amongst warrior players and just like the community in general.
I think Varian Ren is a cool card, and he definitely has his advantages. But as you said, he causes you to overextend versus control, and versus aggro, he doesn't really do anything because you're probably dead by that point, or you've already won. So, however, I do think he shines, especially versus mid-range, provided it isn't something like Paladin that has their equality consecrate, because mid-range Paladin still has that. But against something like Shaman, which isn't very popular right now, a well-timed Varian, or even on curved Varian, because it's a 10-drop, can really cause problems for them because they don't have an easy way to deal with all that. Considering their biggest AoE is Elemental Destruction, but still, they might not even have in their deck, and if they do have it, it still might not deal with things that come out of Varian. So I think he's a card suited for a more mid-range meta, which I'm not sure is necessarily the case with this meta.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I do think it can still work, but like the list needs a lot of tweaking. I've seen them start to do things like, besides the fact that you have to tweak your bombs to make them more viable, like Tharos and Sylvanas, Rag, Ysera, like things that are okay to come out through Varian. I've seen them also start to cut off like one Acolyte for I don't even know what, and like a shield block for Bash. So you don't have like as much draw, because giving up that fatigue game as a control warrior It's pretty brutal. There are a lot of games you can win through fatigue as Control Warrior. It is one of your main win conditions against other, like the mirror match for sure, and just other control matches. But yeah, and let's see, what were other ones you mentioned? Mid-range Paladin got some pretty nice updates with all their like token synergies now. I think they probably like maybe got the most upgrades. I don't know, what do you guys think? Mid-range Paladin. I mean, not to say like not upgrades in terms of like its raw power level is stronger, but it got a lot of cards that fit into its list now that have really like changed it around. But its core is still like the same. Like they're running like Murloc Knights now, sometimes Garrison Commanders or Gormoks. That Silverhand Reagent thing, just a card. Like it seems they got like the most like flat out cards. Whereas you look at like mid-range Hunter, which it was a solid list before. It's solid list now, but it's upgraded. It's basically like you run 2 King's LX now, and sometimes you run a Ram Wrangler.
Yeah, I'll comment because I have played a lot of mid-range Paladin in the past, right before TGT and through TGT. So it's, yeah, like you said, it's not even like we got like a huge power spike, but it's more we have a lot more tools to work with now. So we'll probably see, like, as the meta develops over the long term, you'll probably see a whole bunch of different like types of mid-range and token type Paladin decks. Sort of, you won't really know exactly what cards you're against. Like if you're against a freeze mage, you can name card for card 28 cards guaranteed I'm gonna know that are in your deck, basically. Yeah. But with the new Paladin list now, like with all the new cards, you could maybe name 16 cards that are in a mid-range Paladin deck and maybe get them right, maybe not. So yeah, we have a lot more tools to work with. Elodin, Joey, I wanted to comment on your Huffer Tempo Mage comment. I haven't actually seen that card played like on ladder. Most Tempo Mages aren't running it. So in theory, it's a great card. One, it's Huffer. Huffer's busted. So you drop it on your mirror image in theory, and that seems to be like really strong. So why do you think, since I know you've played some Tempo Mage, why do you think that we haven't like seen Huffer being played in Tempo Mage or like Face Mage even?
The reason is because, well, first off, it's a 3-drop, so it's the same as Huffer from Hunter. Isn't it ironic that mages can get Huffer more consistently?
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I think they get Huffer about as often.
But anyways, the real reason that it's not run is because you have to use a body to get it to do damage. And it's really hard to keep your minions consistently on the field. The best option is mirror image into Huffer into Face, but I think the real reason is because they got a better secret for their decks. It's called Effigy, and if you run Mirror Image, it really messes with that whole synergy of Effigy and like your other creatures, because if you get that type of secret to activate on a Mirror Image, it would really slow you down. So it's really hard to cut for that.
You're saying you don't want Shield Dummy?
No, it's not a good card. But
Okay.
anyways, yeah, I usually see a 1-up or basically reach sometimes in those decks.
Okay, cool. So if you guys don't have any other comments, we can move on to the next topic. Okay, so next topic.
Ram Wrangler and how much I hate that type of like high variance RNG. That's it.
Boom.
Oh, God.
King Trust emote. Okay. Yeah. So Orion is now going to talk to us about the new decks that we've seen. So we talked about all the old decks, the ones that got upgrades, the ones that didn't. So now, Orion, why don't you tell us some about like the main new meta decks that are completely brand new archetypes that we haven't seen before TGT?
Okay, so probably the 2 main decks we've been seeing lately are the Secret Paladin and Dragon Priest. The Secret Paladin, if you haven't encountered it by now on ladder, consider yourself lucky. It runs the new TGT card Mysterious Challenger, which was mentioned earlier. It pulls one copy of each secret into the battlefield when you play it as a battle cry. And again, because these secrets aren't necessarily individually strong, but they do have synergy with each other. And when there's a bunch of them up at once, it's hard to efficiently deal with. And there's been 2 main variants of the deck. There's like an aggro version with like the Leopard Gnomes and Abusives and all that kind of stuff. And then the Challenger tops off their curve, and then they hope to win like probably immediately following turn 6, turn 7-ish. And then there's the mid-range Secret Paladin, which often runs less secrets, so that has some better early game, but it has additional threats after the challenger, such as Dr. Boom and Tyrion. And personally, I found the mid-range one to be a bit stronger, but the aggro one can often steal more games due to the speed of the deck, which gives it an edge over the mid-range one versus aggro decks, which are quite popular at the moment. And then Dragon Priest is kind of a mid-range / tempo priest, which uses a lot of the new cards introduced in TGT, such as the Wormrest Agent and the Twilight Guardian, which kind of fill out the 2-drop and 4-drop slots that the priest needed. Because priest did have other 4-drops in Akanai Soul Priest, but that's not really a proactive 4-drop a lot of the time. It's usually used reactively with things like Circle of Healing. And then priest didn't really have a 2-drop. Like they had to resort to the Gilbin Stalker, which is a neutral common, as their 2-drop for a while. And so what happens when you have this 2- and 4-drop in priest is that the Dark Cultist suddenly becomes really strong, because you have your 2-drop taunt to protect it, and then you can drop Cultist on curve, and then you have the Twilight Guardian, so you have a 2, 3, 4, and then your 3 buffs, you're one of those. So it's really strong. It kind of reminds me of the old Tempo Priest back in the days when Undertaker was a thing. Before it had been nerfed, there was like the Undertaker Priest with like the Undertaker Loot Hoarders and all that kind of stuff.
Death Rattle Priest, I think.
Yeah, Death Rattle Priest. It was basically a tempo deck, but this is like, I kind of view it as a new version of this, but it uses like a different base.
Yeah, a different shell it adopts.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You guys have any comments about that?
Well, unlike the Secret Paladin list, I haven't like played it too much around with the deck myself, but from what I've seen, I tend to agree. I think like the mid-range list is just a little bit stronger. Kind of going along with like things we touched on before, of like the meta does seem to have like slowed down a bit. There are other control decks. I think being able to have like a few other like big threats or stickier minions like the Shredders and stuff, or Lothab, is able to like give the deck just not so much reach, but it's able to like close out the game a little bit more. Because answering like the challenger on curve is already hard enough, and when you throw in a boom on top of that, it just becomes almost impossible to take a win from that point. So we'll see how the lists evolve. I mean, both are obviously very viable and very strong, but I think as it goes on, I want to say like I expect the mid-range list to kind of become the more standard one, if like it is going to be like one wins out. What do you guys think?
Oh, you can.
I think for the longest time that High Mane has been the strongest 6-drop in the game. It's one of those cards where you just drop onto a field and like you're thinking, how do I remove that? Because technically when you drop it, you're putting a 10-9 on turn 6 that you can't really remove with one card.
Yeah.
Now, with the addition to Mysterious Challenger, I actually think it's stronger than High Mane now. Because you're pulling out 5 cards from your deck. That's at maximum. And then on top of that, it gives you a whole bunch of new minions to like block attacks, and then it buffs everything. It's just so hard to deal with.
Yeah.
So,
I do want to say the max it can pull out is 6. I have run into that guy running eye for an eye. Pretty sad when I ping face, but you know, he tried.
Yeah, pretty great. Cool. Yeah, I've been running a bit of Secret Pally myself. As far as laddering goes, I've been running the Zooey aggro version just because it gets you wins quick, and that's kind of what you do on ladder when you're trying to climb. So that's what I've been running. But I was talking to Orion the other day, and I do agree that a mid range is probably going to end up being stronger once we see the list refined probably a little bit more. But like Manny said, that turn 7 boom after the turn 6 challenger is just, you can't win after that. That's literally like when that happens, game regardless of what
you're so sad.
Yeah, you're just done. So great points on that. Secret Pally, Dragon Priest, very strong new decks. So it's cool to see TGT bring in a couple new things. I was hoping for more, and I'm going to actually talk about one right now. But yeah, so moving on, we'll skip that topic. We'll go to I want to talk about a deck that I've been running a lot that anyone who faced me in tournament the last 2 weeks probably saw it. It's Dreadsteed Warlock. So it's an entire Warlock deck based around flooding the board with Dreadsteeds and then just using them as your win condition to clear the board every turn constantly, basically for free. And then you can set up a lethal using Mal'Ganis and Alexstrasza. The reason, if you haven't seen Dreadsteed, we talked about it briefly last week. It's basically a 4-drop 1/1 that it's a demon, and its death rattle is that it resummons itself. So the only way to actually remove it from the board is to silence it. And what the main goal of my deck is that you use Baron Rivendare or Kel'Thuzad if you get to the late game, but usually you use Baron. You drop a Dreadsteed, and then that following turn or the turn after that, you drop a Baron Rivendare, and then you swing your steed into their creature, summons 2 more steeds, then you use Sacrificial Pax, which costs 0 mana. They heal you, create 2 more steeds, and then you can Mortal Coil as well, your steeds, to draw cards while producing more steeds. So usually you get around 4 or 5 or 6 steeds from that combo alone. And then you just have a board full of steeds, and you have it's sort of a control-y mid-range shell, more control. You have a lot of healing and removal like Dark Bomb, Mortal Coil. And I was running Shadow Bolt, but I took that out. So it's kind of control-y, but like I said, the goal is to get all those steeds on the field. And Dreadsteed actually has some really cool synergy with some of the cards I wanted to talk about. In GVG, we saw Anima Golem get released, and we're all like, 6-drop 9/9, that's cool. It dies if your other minions die. It's useless. But Joey actually suggested that to me the other day. I didn't have one, and I just happened to pull one from a pack, so I threw it in, and it's actually been working wonders. Because it's a 6-drop 9/9, and it can't be removed by its effect, because Dreadsteed can't be removed once you establish a board. Unless someone's running Mass Silence, which would make me cry, but fortunately that card's never seen play, so we're good on that front. And the other synergies I wanted to mention briefly were Baron Rivendare, of course, Kel'Thuzad to spawn all the steeds. You use Mal'Ganis as your win condition. Like, after you've controlled the board for a lot, you top deck a Mal'Ganis, you drop him, he gives all your steeds plus 2/2 since they're demons, and then you swing in for lethal. And you also have a Power Overwhelming to reach as well. Hellfire is awesome because you can board wipe and then you just see all your steeds fly back from the sky and land on the field. So it's basically board wiping their side of the field for 3 damage for 4 mana. So it's like a better Consecrate that doesn't hurt you. It's awesome. And
cool. Shout outs to that animation, by the way.
Yeah, seriously, good job whoever created that. It's beautiful. It made me a little sad that it's a little too long to do the Undertaker Warsong Commander lethal, but and if you haven't heard of that, just look it up. It's hilarious. And then the last card I wanted to mention was Twisting Nether. Same thing as Hellfire, board wipe. Clear the board, have all your steeds come back with the awesome animation. I haven't been running Twisting Nether in my deck, but it's pretty good. And if you want my deck list, it's on the Southwest Florida Hearthstone page for that too. So, yeah. Now, also, actually, do you guys have any comments about Dreadsteeds? I know I've played it the most, but you guys have seen it a lot, I'm sure, from me.
I don't know. It looks really cool. It's very pretty. I love it that it's created a situation where people are like unironically running Sacrificial Pact and Twisting Nether. You know, like those are just like legit cards. It has in its list. But I don't know. So you're talking about. I think like the main thing is if it's going to be like an actual competitive archetype, is it going to be better than like Zoo or Malilog or Handlock? Not like in like every way, but against either certain matchups or in this matter or that, because that's what it comes down to. Because like it's a bit of a zero-sum game, you know. You can't bring multiple deck lists for the same class. So and Warlock is, I think, probably the class that has had the most archetypes throughout its history. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. What do you think? Do you think like what does Dreadsteed like do or bring to the table that like other Warlock variants haven't done or can't do?
Yeah, what I see with Dreadsteed is that in a slower game, like against mid-range decks, for example, Dragon Priest, which I consider mid-range, it actually really blows them out because they can't establish board control when you have minions that just respawn constantly as they clear your board. So against mid-range decks, it really dominates the competition. That said, it has a weak early game. So like against like Face Hunters, it's probably like an 80-20 matchup. It's just really hard because they rush and I can't do anything. If I draw my double heal bots, sometimes I can beat a Face Hunter, but that's usually the only time. So what it brings to the table, I think, though, is strong matchups in slower games. Control decks with their sweeps can't sweep my Dread Seeds. Mid-range decks, same thing. And I have board control. Once I get the Dread Steed combo out, which usually happens, if I'm lucky, it happens on turn 5. Sometimes you have to play around the silence though, so you might have to wait till turn 8 or 9, which is the more unfortunate games. Fortunately, there isn't that much silence running around in the meta now, since when TGT came out, people cut like Owl out of their deck for like the new cool cards. So I actually haven't. It's a more fortunate meta right now for Dread Steeds to actually be run, on ladder. But silence is definitely the biggest weakness of the deck, because if they silence your Dread Steed, or for example Cabal Shadow Priest it, you're kind of screwed until you draw your second one. And that does happen. It definitely happens. So you have to play around the silence and the Cabal and anything else that can get rid of. Although I think those are the only two real things. MC Tech, but once you combo, it's fine if they like steal it because you have all of them. So, it's strong though. I really like it, and I don't know if it's gonna be seen in competitive play, but like it's almost there, and I want it to be there. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe another set at the most. Kind of like how Math where he became patron once they like just picked up an alternative win condition, so it wasn't just like dead if it didn't draw its like frothings,
Yeah, exactly.
But
Cool.
we'll see. It's close. It's a lot stronger than I think anyone thought.
Yeah. All right. So I've talked a lot about Dread Sea, so I actually want to talk about shamans now. And obviously everyone was hyped for the set about shaman, and then we saw with their upgrades with Totem Golem, Tuskar Totemic, and Thunderbluff Valiant, which I have golden cards of all, by the way, because I love shaman. Unfortunately, those cards have not proven to be as effective as everyone thought they would be. We see mid-range shaman struggling on the ladder, Tempo Storm, which you shouldn't trust, but they have it labeled correctly as like a tier 4 deck, maybe tier 3, but they have it as tier 4. It's just lacking. So I was going to talk a little bit about that, but everyone kind of knows that, so it's obvious. I mean, you can still run it. It's a viable deck. It's just not strong as everyone thought it would be.
No.
And I think the biggest reason for that is because we see all these other archetypes and all these other classes, like we talked about earlier, getting all these cool upgrades and new cards. And so this set brought Shaman on par with what the other classes were before TGT, but all the other classes also got new things except for Rogue this set. So
So they just kind
it
of
really just brought them up to where everything else was, and now they're still behind, basically, is what I'm trying to get to. So
Yeah.
people have been running different archetypes to try it out, because the mid-range shaman just is generally like the accepted good archetype for shaman. I've seen a couple mech shamans coming back on ladder, which kind of makes me sad as a shaman player. I hate to see cheese decks like that
Yeah.
for my class being the only really good decks.
Right.
But mech shaman's kind of been slack. Sorry, did you have something to say, Manny?
Yeah, I was actually just watching like the Archon League today, and out of like the 4 teams that played, the one team that did bring a shaman, it was like a mech shaman that was running like Fireguard Destroyers and like one Tuskar Totemic.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So
Kinda see that.
it's sad to me that mech shaman's the only like viable shaman archetype. I don't think it's viable, but it might be. I don't know. They brought it, so they're probably smarter than me.
Yeah. I mean, it can still wins. It has tons of like reach.
Yeah, that's what.
So, I don't know. It's kind of like how mid-range hunter was like, solid enough before. Now you just throw in LX. Like mech shaman was fine enough before. Now you just add in some Tuskar Totemics, I guess.
Yeah,
And they're still fine. Fight for the board better.
yeah, cool.
Well-
And then there was one more archetype I've tried out is the control shaman archetype. We saw the huge board wipe with elemental destruction come in. It combos really well with lava shock, but the shell of the deck itself doesn't have enough to get there as a competitively viable deck or a ladder worthy deck. It doesn't have enough late game threat. Some people are running Malagos, some people are running double Rockbiter, Alakir as their win condition, but it doesn't do well enough yet to control the board. A similar archetype, however, to sort of a control-y type shell for Shaman is actually Dragon Shaman, and we haven't really heard much about it. Orion said he's been playing it and that he's seen, I forget which streamer it was, Orion will tell us in a second, playing a lot of it. So it apparently has a lot of potential because I keep hearing its name, but I haven't actually seen it myself. So Orion, why don't you tell us a little bit about Dragon Shaman and why you think it might be viable?
All right. Well, Dragon Shaman was a deck that I theory crafted a version of it. Like as soon as TGT came out, I crafted the cards and like, let's do this. And it was working well for me at first, but I felt that something wasn't quite refined about it. And eventually I came to, or after watching Kalento play some Dragon Shaman, I came to a certain list, which I can't include here because it's, but it's basically kind of like a control shaman, like you mentioned, but I think it's like a different take on it, and that it has actually no early game minions. Its earliest drop is the Twilight Guardian, which is a 4-drop, but so it runs things like double healing wave to kind of mitigate the damage from aggro that it takes during the early game. And with double lightning storm and double elemental destruction, it kind of aims to seize the board at some point. And once it does that, it drops high value minions like the Twilight Guardian, Azure Drake, Fire Elementals, things like that. Fire Elementals or Blackwing Corruptors. I find that's kind of a personal preference. And use those to take control of the board. And then you typically have like Malagos as a win condition when you have, or following an Emperor discount on some burn spells like Lightning Bolt and sometimes Crackle. But if this condition doesn't work, you can go for a value game with Ystera, who can lead to some pretty insane plays if she isn't removed quickly. So I've been playing around with this list a lot. I climbed from, I think it was around rank 11 or 12 to 6 with relative ease with this deck. So it's definitely worth checking out. I can post a list at some point in time.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds pretty cool. I've been saying that I'm going to play it on your computer since I don't have the cards, but
Right.
get around to that soon because I want to try. It sounds pretty awesome.
This is a pretty fun deck.
Yeah, cool. So we might people see a possibly viable shaman deck, but as of right now, not yet. But
I've actually seen some people talk. I don't know if it's the same list as the Dragon Shaman, but yeah, it's like an evolution of like the old like Malay Shaman that people are like now calling like Zeus Shaman because you shoot a bunch of lightning bolts at the end, which follows a similar kind of like control plan as like a Freeze Mage or whatever. I think it still has like Fire Elementals. I don't think it goes as all in on the Dragon package. Maybe just like Malay and maybe an Alex, and then it runs like Elemental Destructions and Lava Shocks and just things to control the board, and then just like your Zeus at the end, I guess, and you're just like zapping lightning bolts at people's faces. So I don't know, like maybe hopefully we'll see like a different kind of shaman list emerge. Fingers crossed.
It's definitely something. I think shaman as an archetype, like it could have potential, but we need more people to experiment with it, and shaman's kind of one of those not popular classes to begin with. So over time, you're right, we might see something with some kind of Zeus dragon control hybrid, or mid-range might find some kind of spike or some favorable meta that we might run into. So we'll see how shaman goes, but right now it's sad to see that they're not popular as a shaman main myself. So all right, so we're going to switch from the general meta now. I want to talk for the last third of the segment about our Tavern Dweller circuit and how everything's been going with that and how last week was. So let's see. Let's look at the distribution of the most played classes. I think we have a cool graphic for that. And Manny, why don't you talk about this and like why you think which classes showed up the most and whatnot?
Yeah. Well, I think if you see it, it was kind of like the same as like last week. The 3 most played are still the 3 most played, which is Paladin, Warrior, and Mage. And the difference now is that Paladins have shot like way up in popularity, I think, as people are really starting to like figure out like the power of Seeker Paladin. I think like last week and early on when it came onto the scene, people were like, okay, this is definitely strong, there's some potential, but they weren't sure just like how strong it was going to be and whether or not it was just kind of like a gimmick that was going to die down. And I think at this point, people are pretty like sold on the idea and like legitimately think it's one of the strongest decks out there right now. So yeah, it's shot up like way in popularity. Mage, I think Mage is just one of those lists that Freeze Mage is still very, very strong. I think we always have one making it to the semis, at least one. Especially, it's a deck that rewards a lot of skilled play, so that kind of makes sense that you see like the players making it to semis and on, like enjoying that deck. But other than that, the class itself still has like tons of like viable archetypes of like mech mage and tempo and like some like grinder mages, whether that's just like a duplicate mage or like an Echo Giants mage. And then Warrior dipped down a bit, but Nope, it's still super high up there. I think that's just kind of like Patron is still just as strong as ever. I think the only reason it's so low is because we just happen to not have as many like experienced Patron players in this meta, and Control is still like a good archetype, and I know some people are still messing with Dragon Warriors. And then other than that, the distribution after that seems to go way down. But also kind of like what would you expect? Like Hunter is always like a solid class to bring. Druid, I think, is maybe going to get more and more popular because it got some really solid upgrades. And Combo Druid was always like a good list, but this was like the first expansion where it actually got solid upgrades because BRM didn't really give it anything and GVG didn't give it anything. Other than that, yeah, I'm actually surprised that some of these other classes weren't played more. I guess particularly Priest, because Dragon Priest seems to be a pretty strong deck out right now, but I guess maybe it doesn't have a good matchup against Secret Paladin, which is obviously like everywhere right now. So I don't know if you guys want to chime in with anything.
Regarding Dragon Priest, I think it actually is somewhat favored versus Secret Paladin if you're able to curve out well, which isn't too hard to do most of the time, as long as you mulligan properly and stuff. But yeah, if you're able to curve out, you can kind of take care of their threats. Like your early game is better than theirs in a way, in that like your Warm Rest Agent trades with their Juggler, you heal it up, or drop Cultist, and then you drop Twilight Guardian. And that kind of explosive start is just really hard for them to keep up with, especially if they haven't drawn like a Truce Over, or if they draw secrets in their opening hand. You can kind of just overwhelm them with your early tempo plays. And then you do have good board clears with Holy Nova, sometimes Light Bomb. And then I've seen a lot of lists that are running Cabal Shadow Priest, and some even have Shadow Word Pain, which completely wrecks Secret Paladin a lot of the time. So Secret or Dragon Priest definitely has the tools to deal with Secret Paladin. So I'm actually not sure why it hasn't been seen as much play. Perhaps it has to do with Control Warriors, because I believe Control Warrior is kind of hard for a Dragon Priest to deal with, because the Control Warrior can outvalue them in the long game, which means the Priest kind of has to go for like a tempo head play style to kind of beat them before they stabilize. So it could be that. It could also be Druids.
I could see that. Speaking like, because I like to play Control Warrior a lot. Yeah, you kind of you're able to survive their like super high value early minions, and then you're just gonna beat them in late game. I actually like early on TDG. I thought that matchup would be a lot harder than I thought, because I remember like old like Control Warrior, Control Priest games were actually like pretty hard, although slightly Warrior favored. But yeah, I don't think. Yeah, Dragon Priest doesn't really like handle Control Warrior very well. Although I don't know like what the split is like out of these warriors. But yeah, that could be a reason. I think it's also the Dragon Priest still doesn't have like a closer. Like whenever I'm playing, like I know I would think like even as Secret Paladin, like they might have an explosive start, but you're like if you can get to your Mysterious Challenger somewhat safe, you're not really worried about the Priest like having burn spells or anything to like close out the game.
That's true.
And I don't know. That's just like always my philosophy when I'm going against Priest. Like I don't have to be like that scared because they're not gonna like double fireball me or something.
Cool. One more thing I want to talk about on this distribution is it's actually kind of funny. It's a coincidence, I guess. Both finalists, despite Paladin being the most popular deck, there were 18 total entrants in this tournament. 15 of them ran Paladin, and our two finalists did not run Paladin. They both ran, we'll talk soon about their decks, Mage, Warrior, and Druid. So I found that kind of funny. Cool. So why don't we go ahead and move in? We're going to close out here soon, but let's go ahead and move into the finalist decks. I want you guys to focus on 2 points when we're looking at these decks. First, are their decks standard like meta decks? And the ones that are, if there's any tech choice differences or any differences from like a standard list that you guys are familiar with, share those with us so we can maybe get a insight as to why they might be different. And then if there's any lists, which I know there are from looking right now, that aren't meta decks, so why don't we talk about those? Actually, I think Joey will talk about his own decks, since he chose a couple of unconventional choices in his list. So, cool. Why don't you guys talk about those for me?
Okay.
Starting off, I brought Fatigue Warrior. It is a different style of Control Warrior. Now, the only difference is I'm running Justicar, something that a lot of Control Warriors have been picking up. But Justicar, Frost Giants, and of course Juggernaut, because that's Fatigue. The reason I picked to play around with these cards is when I was trying it, I found that during my games as warrior, I was hero powering a lot, and the meta right now is switched to a meta where BGH isn't ran as much because most of the strong minions that are put in that have been added on have been like 6 attack or 5 attack and that sort of thing. So BGH actually hasn't been getting ran very often anymore. So I swapped out Sludge Belchers for Frost Giants. And then the thing I felt was the hardest against most control decks and like Freeze Mage and all that stuff is I didn't really have the burst I needed because I had to take out a lot of whirlwind effects for Gramash to put in some of the more control cards and continue to have like draw mechanics and things like that. So I put in Juggernaut for a little bit of a late game reach because most of the time, as Yoda said, that your win condition is milling sometimes as warrior or bringing in the fatigue really.
Yeah. Funny that you mentioned that. Like looking at this list, this would actually be a really solid list to throw Varian in because you have a lot of bombs that you're not really worried about. Like if you didn't have I guess the Juggernaut, you're only really worried about losing the Justicar battle cry and the Alex. And Shield made him battle cry is like inconvenient, but it's not like game breaking to lose. But like also the Giants, like the Giants are like fantastic pulls off Varian because they're just kind of like vanillas. Like you're not like you just kind of want them on the board. You're not sad to like lose them in any way.
Definitely, I can see it run in this deck. I actually might try that.
Yeah, you also cut the shield blocks for bashes, so you're. Oh wait, no, you still have shield blocks on mine. I was gonna say, yeah, if like some of the draw was like less than, at least that's just from what I heard because I stopped messing with Varian around too much. But yeah.
All right, and go ahead and also tell us. You were telling me about how you made this Mech Mage deck. Why don't you tell our audience and just tell us more about like what was going through your head when you put this Mech Mage together?
So when I was playing Mech Mage in the current meta, as I said before, aggro decks are getting harder and harder to play because of all the healing effects and all the big taunt minions that are brought. That new dragon card is so hard to deal with as an aggro deck. If you don't run enough silences to get rid of it. Then on top of that, like everyone's getting all these heal bots and stuff in their decks and new things to keep you from essentially killing their face. So when I was making this deck, I tried to make efficient curved minions for the early game, and then strong threats that are hard to deal with. Because I knew when I was going to go into this tournament that a lot of people would be playing Freeze Mage, and their strong board wipes don't really do anything to Shredder, to Sky Golem, and to other creatures that have a lot of health. So I put in a lot of threats that really stopped that. And then I added Rag because another reason no one's really running BGH anymore, so it seemed like a good end game reach card. And that's pretty much all it was that was different about that.
Okay.
Yeah. Looks pretty solid. It's different than like a standard Mech Mage list, but we've seen like Mech Mages run Rag in general because you can kind of toss them into like an aggro deck as a finisher. And if you did like want to have like a good matchup against Freeze Mages, Rag is something that really totes that in your favor. The Lotheb too, so yeah. And then I think the only other thing that's like not as standard is you have you're running like portals and board, but then you also have mana worms, so like it evens out. Like when you do see portals in Mech Mage, you tend to see mana worms. But yeah, I do really like actually like the Freeze Mage tech in this between like Rag and Lotheb. I imagine that's something that like really swings that in your favor.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. And is there anything about your druid list that's different that we should know, or is it like a standard combo druid?
It is a completely standard combo druid. The only thing is it's running the new variant of a few tokens here and there, just to give it that extra reach on combo.
Gotcha. And you love druid, right?
Oh yeah, it's so good.
That's why you chose to bring it to this weekly.
Oh, definitely. I don't regret it at all.
Okay.
I think
sarcastically. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you can finish.
Okay, I was going to say I'm sarcastically saying that because Joey made a comment to me about how he hates druid and he's never going to play it again. So, all right, that's all. Go ahead, Manny. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say you have a Violet Teachers in here, which is pretty significant. I know a lot more Druid lists are trying to fit in like extra 4-drops, whereas it used to just be like the Keepers and Shredders. Because now that you're running like 2 Wild Growths and 2 Aspirants, you're much more likely to go like 1, 2, 4 in your curve.
Definitely.
So yeah, I don't know. That's a change. Like I think the most common one people are like putting in is either like Savage Combatant or the Violet Teachers. So I'm guessing you went with the Teachers because you also are running Living Roots.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And the Savage Combatants, I've been seeing Orion run those for a few games in Druid, and I'd like to ask him how that's been working out.
Savage Combatant's a really interesting card because you can ramp it out early, and that's like a huge threat that they have to deal with, or you can just drop it on 4 mana or your turn 3 whenever you happen to have 4 mana, and from there on, if it isn't removed, you get a really good value hero power. You can clear a small minion, or you can push a little bit of face damage if they play something small that just dies to your keeper or whatever you might play. So the Savage Combatant it provides a lot of early pressure, or it's like a priority target to remove, and if they do remove it, it gives the Druid initiative again, which is important for Druid because they don't really have ways to take back the board very effectively. They have swipes and wraths, but that's about it. So cards that can give the Druid tempo are really strong, and Savage Combatant is one of those. And another card that kind of fits that same role that I'm surprised you aren't seeing is Mulch. And I understand.
I was gonna say that, but
right.
Yeah, go on.
I understand Mulch costs 3 mana, which doesn't necessarily fit in the Druid's curve. But obviously, you don't play Mulch on curve, and it's still a pretty strong tempo card. So I just wanted to hear a little bit of you guys' thoughts of why we aren't seeing Mulch at all.
Honestly, I think it's that they got enough other good stuff that they can continue their like the same game plan they've always had of just like going all in and reaching for combo at the end, like between Living Roots and Aspirant, and even like just the Savage Combatant. Because yeah, Mulch is something that like I thought on its face would be like amazing in Druid, but like I guess if Mulch was the only thing they got, they would run it. But the fact that now they need to fit in at least 4 extra card slots for just like the Living Roots and Aspirants,
That's true.
it might be just clogging it up a little bit.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. So let's go ahead and get into Ice Fat's deck real quick. Decks. He was actually running the same classes, but he was running Freeze Mage instead of Mech Mage and Patron Warrior instead of Fatigue or Control Warrior. But the combo Druid lists are very similar, minus like 1 or 2 cards. So we're not really going to talk about the Druid list because we basically just went over it. They're basically the same list. So
Yeah,
let's talk about...
they're checked a bit differently, but
yeah.
You can
Joey,
understand the
why don't
text by
you-
looking at them.
Sorry, Manny. Joey, why don't you make a couple comments about like how it was facing his Patron Warrior? And I remember you said you thought you thought you were against Control Warrior. You could tell us why real quick, and then same thing for the Freeze Mage.
Well, the thing about Patron Warrior versus Control Warrior is their early game is almost the exact same. You got like War Axe, you got he was running Shield Slams, and all of your armor up spells and your acolytes and things of that sort. And when you do that, you can tend to make some mistakes based on how you think the matchup is going to go. You might clear things earlier than you should. And I actually made a mistake like that. I can't remember what it was, but I cleared something early with a resource I should have kept on to. And it was Wrath, yeah. I didn't realize what I was versing at the time. That's just something to watch out for when you're playing against Warrior or Mage. They have so many different variants in their class. And Paladin now too, with the 2 new decks that they just got received. But yeah, that's pretty much all it was. It was a normal Patron Warrior versus Control Warrior matchup. I got a lucky bomb off after an Alistraza into a reach. So I think RNG was on my side in that match.
Yes. In case anyone didn't see it, I have to summarize it real quick. He dropped, which you should go watch it because we have the VODs, but he drops an Iron Juggernaut, then 2 turns later he drops Alistraza, and then the bomb from Iron Juggernaut comes out of his deck and puts Ice Fat at 5 health. So Joey was able to finish that match very swiftly at that point. So
Yeah.
very cool. And did you have any comments about Ice Fat's Freeze Mage at all?
The text I added to the deck actually really helps with the matchup. Usually it's supposed to be in the Freeze Mage matchup. It's supposed to be in the Freeze Mage's favor, but my text really helped fight a lot of the early board clears, and I was able to take control of the board and clear a few ice blocks before he had to finally Alex Straza.
Cool.
And, yeah.
Awesome. So your text definitely came in handy for the final. That's pretty cool. All right.
Yeah.
So, do we have any other comments about the finals that you guys want to make real quick before we conclude?
No, I don't think so.
I think
These
that's
lists
good.
look like pretty standard. I mean, Patron and Freeze Mage are both like lists that are very, very hard to change. So
Yeah. I think in the future we should talk more on this on our show about like matchups and choosing the different lineups for what decks you choose, to how they complement each other. I think we should talk more about that next time. We didn't have anything prepared for that this time, and if anyone hasn't read Orion's blog post that went along with last week's Tavern Talk, it's on the Eagle Esports website. It was actually a really good read and really informative in that sense of as far as tournament lineups go. I learned a lot, so it's a really good read, and it's still on the homepage of the website at eagleesports.com. So definitely check that out. So in conclusion, remember to sign up for next Sunday's weekly. It's at 5:30 again as usual. RSVP on the Facebook page, and also go ahead and submit your deck list to the Google form since we're only a couple days out now. Another huge announcement: Fall LAN, October 3rd, FGCU Cohen's Center Ballroom. It's going to be awesome. We've got Hearthstone Tournament, of course, Smash 4, Smash Melee, and Rocket League, and I believe League of Legends. So EagleEsports.com has all the event registration stuff. If you plan on coming out, I'm assuming everyone watching this is a Hearthstone player, so I'll just talk about the Hearthstone side. There's rewards, there's prizes. You've got like Warcraft art books. We have a Hearthstone mug. Packs, of course, for the top 16 players. And there's one more that I'm forgetting. Murloc plushie. So awesome prizes, and there could be more things. We don't know for sure, but those are the at least prizes. So we could definitely have more. So prizes are awesome for the Hearthstone tournament. So you guys should definitely come out for that. It's going to be a blast. And you can sign up by going to the Eagle Esports website and hitting the event registration, and there's a sign up button there. If you're going to come, please do that sooner than later, because we need to get good number counts. So we need to have people register before October 2nd. If you guys could register as soon as you see this, that would be awesome, and we'd really appreciate it. It would help us organize the event much better. So thank you for registering early, and I can't wait to see you guys at that. And with that, we're going to conclude. So I just want to thank Joey, Eladin, Manny, Yoda, and Ryan Thron for participating today. So thanks so much, guys. And thank you for